Go live.
You have to unshare.
Good evening. My name is Jim Kello. Welcome to New Tracks. This is where mentors can help you build better models. Thanks so much for coming this evening. Hope you come back often and tell your friends about us. If you're new to the show, please go to our website, newtracksmodeling.com, and subscribe. Once you subscribe, you'll get an email to confirm that they have your email correctly. And if you'll confirm that that's your email, then you're fully subscribed and you'll start getting the login information for all our future shows. Plus, you'll also be eligible for the door prizes that we have at some of our shows. Speaking of door prizes, the next one coming up is August the 25th. And it's going to be made by Coastman Scenic Products. The one after that is the show for August 28th, and that's by Nick Santo, who owns Decoder Buddies. And I thank both of those companies for donating the door prizes for those two shows, and hope that you'll put that on your calendar and make sure that you to come and possibly win the door prize. If you have friends that you think might be interested in our show, once you have gotten a login from the website, please share it with them. We have no problem with you doing that at all. We just ask you not to send me emails to any public site, only for security reasons. If you have a little spare time, we hope that you'll volunteer to help us produce the shows. We need a lot of people involved to do them correctly. And we would appreciate any help that you can possibly give us. If you'll just send me an email to jimkello1, numeric 1, @gmail, I'll reply to you and we'll talk about what your interest might be to help us. We have some great build-alongs coming up shortly. We have Rick and Marie Hunter coming back. They're building a trestle this time. They start on September the 1st and go through October the 6th. Normally, our build-alongs are all 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the model and depending on the person building it and how much time they figure that they're going to need. This one's a little longer than that, but the way that Rick and Marie do it, both discussing not just the model, but the prototype the model's based on, I think is extremely interesting, and I think you'll really enjoy it. They have a great price for the model if you're going to build it along with Marie, who is the one that builds it. And for an addition, if you want to have the Ultimation equipment that makes building this kind of a model easier, Al Collins, the owner of Ultimation, is offering a $20 discount off of his repeater combination kit for the sander that he produces. So that's a great deal, both a discount on the model itself and the Ultimation product. Next, coming up on September the 22nd is Martin Brechbiel MMR, who you've seen on our show many times, who's building a Leadville Designs kit. I was really impressed when I first saw Leadville Designs' website and the philosophy of its owner and how he's building his kits and what his kits represent to him. So this is going to also have a great price. It's a 10% discount if you order it between the 15th of August and the 30th of September and mention New Tracks when you place your order. Then you'll get a 10% discount off of the maintenance of way car that Martin will be building on the show. Then Jim Murphy is going to be building a LaBelle business car starting October the 13th for either 4 or 5 weeks, something like that. And this is available in both O and HO. There's a 25% discount on the car from LaBelle. This is the second time LaBelle has been involved in one of the build-alongs for their car kits. And I really do appreciate Rick Steele for coming back and wanting to do a second one. Jim Murphy, excellent modeler. You won't find many people that are any better than he is. And I think that you're really going to enjoy his presentation. Plus, Jamie Bothwell is around, and he can help you super detail the underbody of passenger cars, because that's his specialty. He's been on the show several times talking about it and showing us the kind of detail that he produces for his passenger cars. So he could really be of help to people that want to super detail the business car that Jim Murphy's going to build on the show. Then starting October the 16th, Bill Davis is going to build a Stephen Milley kit for a rail scale models kit. There's going to be a 20% discount on that. This is a tobacco barn kit. This is not just your normal barn. And I think you'll find this really exciting and interesting. Bill Davis, you know him. He's been on the show. He's done a build along before of another manufacturer. And he's going to start this build along. So with that, with getting the 20% discount on this one, and it's available in N scale, HO, S scale, and O scale. You have to mention new tracks when you order it, when you check out. And it's one word, not two words, one word for this manufacturer. New tracks, one word. Then starting November the 6th, Dave Schultz is going to start building an all-nation waffle side boxcar in O scale. I am so happy that All Nation is back in the market. They used to be a major force in the hobby way back when I was a kid. And then the owner died, and now the new owner bought it from his estate and is revitalizing the company and bringing it back to the market, and was kind enough to want to participate with our program. And he's going to offer the waffle side boxcar kit in O scale that Dave Schultz is going to build. You've seen Dave on the show before, and he's just an excellent modeler. So you'll really enjoy his presentation and how he's going to put this kit together. This kit really comes in two different versions. There's a high-end version, as John Wolfel says, that cost $159.95 plus $12 for shipping and handling. It's a more comprehensive, and it's got multiple options. So this is not for the faint of heart modeler. This one takes some work and some decision making to decide which of the options that are available in this kit you want to follow. The other version of the kit sells for $109.95 plus the $12 shipping and handling. And on this second version, which is not as complicated a kit, but produces the same kind of a model, you'll get a 5% discount from John on either kit that you order, because John is just getting the company started and bringing it back to life. And he's doing all of the work, producing the kits himself. He's not shelling it out to anybody else to do all of the preparation of the model and packaging and so forth. He asks you to order just as soon as you possibly can. And I hope that you'll take a long look at this. John, by the way, is going to be our guest featured modeler this coming Saturday. So if you get a chance, you want to meet him, that'll be your opportunity, and he can talk about what All Nations plans are for the future. Our next My Build, which is your opportunity to show us the models that you've been building and working on, is August the 21st. And this is done by Jeremy Wyatt, who has taken over from Chris Course this summer. And to enter and to participate in this, which this is a participation show, both the build-alongs, both the My Builds, everything that we do calls for participation by somebody. We hope that you'll send a photo of your model that you're working on or finished with a caption for the photo and your name, and just email it to Jeremy. And once you've done that, then Jeremy will put it together in his presentation, that he's going to do for the show. And if you want to be live on the show, then let Jeremy know, and you can talk about the model in the photo that you sent. If you can't attend the show or would rather not do it live yourself, then Jeremy will present your model and your caption that you sent him. So we hope that you'll do that. We hope that this will encourage other people to see what other modelers have accomplished and want to get involved with building more models. After all, that's the purpose of the show. That's what mentoring is all about. And this is one attempt to have modelers who are actually building things show what they're building so that their mentoring can help other people try to see what's possible and how they're doing some things. Anybody can ask you questions if they want to. So we hope that you'll participate and want to show us what you've been modeling and building. Now, with those announcements made, I'd like to turn for our quick tip of the evening to Paul Thomson. Paul's been away a few weeks getting some personal situations dealt with. And it's a welcome back, Paul. I'm so glad that you're here this evening.
Great. Thank you very much, Jim. Tonight's quick tip is truly going to be quick. And perhaps I would just start off saying how I just stumbled into this. I've been having a look at building a brass locomotive kit. And in doing research for that, I came across something which I think others might actually like. And I'll just start my share screen here and see if, okay, what you're looking at is a disc. And I'm sorry it's sort of twisted the wrong way, but the title of this thing is The Art of Soldering as Applied to Model Railroading. And it's available from PBL. You can look them up on the web, and they have a very interesting site. But this disc will cost you a few dollars, but I started looking at this and I thought to myself, I wish I'd seen this when I had my first brass locomotives or was looking for a basket case brass locomotive, which I've turned down because I didn't know what to do with. And this is just one of those things where the amount of information on there is almost priceless. And I would urge anybody that can get a copy of this or have a look at it, especially if you're considering doing anything with brass, rebuilding, fixing, whatever. There's a lot of information on here. It runs through soldering irons, it runs through torches, it runs through flux, it runs through just about everything, and is a very interesting piece of information. And basically, guys, that's my tip for the night. Thank you very much.
Well, Paul, I got to ask you a question. What kit, what are you building?
I'm actually looking at one of the old Laval kits that is put out by Stevenson Preservation. It's just got me intrigued. I love logging locomotives, and I think this thing can be adapted to run on P48 very easily. And it's just one of those things. I've never done this, and once you start looking at it, and it's possible. It's really quite possible.
Well, I know you'll do a great job with it. I hope you'll share it with us when you get it built. I'd love to see it.
Yeah, I'm. As I say, it's one of those things where you start doing the research, and it's almost like you have to talk yourself into this. But I'm just about there.
Well, best of luck to you. I know you'll do well. It's not that hard.
Thanks, Jim.
Now I'd like to turn to Martin Brechbiel MMR. Martin, welcome tonight. I can't wait to see what you're going to share with us this evening.
Oh, well, it's going to be relatively brief. Doggone it. Here we go here. Share screen. There we go. I'm in between. I'm straddling two different computers at the same time, which is not helping things. And it's even more complicated since they're in two different rooms. So that lovely modern convenience of the personal computer. When you have to change from your old one, which you've been using forever, to the new one, which you know nothing about, and it's configured completely differently, it's a bit of an adventure. Okay, so where was I? I was building that Pennsylvania Railroad dairy reefer, the Stewart Lundahl kit from the early 50s is my best guess. It might be late 40s for all I know. There was no date on anything. And I'm going to go back to the beginning just for a little bit, because what we're building is this Pennsylvania company reefer car, the dairy reefer. But they did make 2 other kits. It's curious, as was pointed out, why would somebody in California be making Pennsylvania Railroad kits? And it becomes kind of obvious. Well, they obviously liked one of the 3 models, but it becomes pretty obvious why when you go back and look at it. And I just happen to have built up copies of both of those. I recently bought a lot of freight cars off eBay, about 9 different cars and some other odds and ends. And in the bottom of the box, guess what was there? Yes, the Lundahl Union Line car. Basically looks a lot like the dairy reefer. In fact, it's identical except for the paint job. It's all the same parts. Same basic end from the whatever years that is, with the double brake system. And at the other end of the box was the Pennsylvania Railroad boxcar kit, which is also identical except for the paint job. So I think what we're looking at here is some expediency in the production of kits. If you spend all the money making all the castings and parts, how many cars can you apply them to by just changing the paint job on 2 sides and let the modeler deal with the rest? Well, apparently you can, these 3 cars are pretty close to interchangeable. So this is the XLA. So you can look that up for all the Pennsy people in the room. We're talking a long time ago. So at the bottom of the box of the Stewart Lundahl kit that I'm building at the moment, they sold their own plasticate adhesive, the economical 48 cubic centimeter jar for 35 cents, which replaces all your commonly used glues and cements, which unfortunately did not come in the box with the kit, but we have modern day replacements with CA and other odds and ends. So we don't really need this too badly, but I thought it was an interesting little detail. 35 cents for a jar of adhesive. Well, picking up where we left off last time, I hadn't dropped the sides in yet. And they do drop in with just a little bit of sanding at the ends, in between the 2 ends. So the end of this, just take my favorite sanding block, which is a 2x4, about 8 inches long, with some 120 grit paper on it, and just sand it back at a slight bevel until it drops into place. You have a nice clean fit. A little bit of tight bond on the surfaces on the inside, and we're done. The door, I assembled the door as one unit with the runners, as opposed to trying to put the runner up here, slide the door into it, then put the other runner on it without making too much of a mess. It just seemed a lot easier to prefab it as a unit and then drop it on the car. And I decided I'm not going to have this operate. I have cars that do Lundahl kits, and some do, some don't. I don't really care one way or the other about that. It doesn't do a lot for me. The prefabbed large grabs just dropped on here with a little bit of goo, a little bit of CA, corner brackets. You have to bend those 90 degrees. You can see the holes in them for the nails. Remember at the very beginning of this, I showed a big tray of nails. This kit actually gets nailed together. We got to come back and do that. Otherwise, we're going to leave holes everywhere on the car. And these are the rope drags, or didn't have polling pockets. It had hooks on the side. Kit did not provide those. It talked about them in the instructions, showed them, didn't provide them. So that's a little piece of brass with a loop of phosphor bronze wire, just drilled 2 holes, fed it through the loop, soldered it from the backside, snipped it off, sanded it smooth, painted it black, dropped it in place. Okay. On the roof. Well, it's painted red now. That's actually Tuscan. The instructions do call for Tuscan, and the walk is glued in place. Pre-painted the hatches, dropped those into place, a little bit of goo and CA. And there's a grab at each end, more of those prefab grabs. So they're sort of pre-painted. I left the middle open because you can get to that easier later, not worry about it. Okay, well, the ends are kind of orange now with all the little pieces added to them. So there's the corner braces, grabs on the ends, just dropped into place again with a little bit of CA, just enough that you can see it when you touch it to the painted surface. You can feel it grab, take it back off, add a little CA to that, put it back in place. It doesn't go anywhere after you do that. Lots of little touch-up paints and little things to do later. And the other end, same story. So I don't need to go through that again. So fast forward to the bitter end. Okay, I skipped over the steps. I did put those on. And you can see, well, we don't have holes anymore. The nails are in place. So this is what I did this afternoon. It's a lot of fun. You go around here with your battery powered Dremel with a number 73 drill until you break both the ones you have off in the side. And then you go to a number 72 and keep going. I think that one and that one has my last 2 number 73s in it. Snapped right off flush. Well, okay. Not coming back out. That'll hold the bracket in place. Good enough. I'll buy some more 73s. Actually, I'm going to send Greg up the main line to get them for me. But yeah, so you just drill. Everything gets a nail in it. So there's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 nails on a side. 32 of the sides. And then you got to do the ends and the roof. But you do have enough nails. And as I said, I wrote here, I dipped them in CA and dropped them into the hole. Well, usually I don't drill the hole deep enough, so I ended up pushing it actually into the wood. So beyond the friction of the wood and the CA, they're not coming back off. So those parts are not going anywhere. And that's the other reason why you go back and do this. You can't rely upon the glue on little details hanging around forever. Added trucks and couplers. And you can see the top. Nails, great. They're all nailed together. Happy, happy, joy, joy. Nails and nails. At least they're not glaringly, ridiculously obvious. So this is actually a pretty subtle use of these very tiny brad nails that they supply. They work fine. A little tedious, picking them all up with the hemostat and dipping them in glue and dropping them into place. It's a slow afternoon, but only other thing I had to do was to not burn my fingers soldering back together an IMP hopper car. So it was this or that, or both at the same time, as it turned out. And there's the end. So you can see the nails, and they do a passingly decent job of giving you something that might pass, well, 3 feet it will, for your nut bolt and washer casting. So if I had brass nut bolt washer castings, that's what I'd be using. Grant Line doesn't make them anymore, and I'm not buying them from Precision Scale because I can't afford that many of them for that price for just one kit. I am painfully frugal at times. So you do the other end, a little more touch up. I did about 3 more layers of touch up paint after I got done taking the photos, because every time I went back and said, oh yeah, there's another little piece of shiny metal that I'm not supposed to be seeing. Oh, there's a little bit of black that's on the orange. There's a little bit of Tuscan missing. Okay, well, you keep doing that about 4 or 5 times. Eventually it stops happening and you say, we're done. And we're done with this car. Next week, I have no idea what I'm doing. We'll figure it out, but I'll see you there.
That's a good looking car.
It came out pretty decent. And
I
the other
think
two,
I think that's a darn good looking car, but all three of them are.
yeah, I was gonna say, the other two aren't too shabby. They're a little dirty. I just haven't cleaned them yet. But we'll call that creative weathering.
Yeah, but for a kit that old, I think that's pretty good.
That just shows we had really good kits 50, 60, 70 years ago.
Kind of
And,
scary, isn't it?
it's kind of frightening that people want, well, they don't want to build kits anymore, some of them, but this is not a hard kit to build. And those instructions are extremely detailed. The only challenge to this car, building one of these kits, and I did run into it, and I completely skipped over it, and needs to be mentioned. Those doors are white metal Zamek castings.
Mm.
They're warped. They do warp. Well, after 60, 70 years, we warp too. Warping is endemic to the population, and it's endemic to old, thin Zamek. And what I did to flatten that out, when I found that out at the very beginning, I took a pair of 2x4s, dropped the one door between the 2x4 blocks, and put a clamp on it and forgot about it for 3 weeks. And said, well, if that doesn't fix it, I'm in a lot more trouble than I know how to get out of, except to scratch build a door or use the one that wasn't warped so bad and go get some RTV and cast a couple of doors. But you can flatten it out if you're slow and easy on putting the clamp pressure on between the two 2x4s. They will flatten out, and it came out okay. So I'm rather pleased with it. The only other problem with all these kits, they all have the same number. So if you have a string of dairy reefers, they're all the same dairy reefer. So unless you want to scrape a number off and paint a number back on in black ink, well, you just kind of have to blink at it when it goes by and decide that, oh, they're different numbers. Pretend it won't hurt too much. Any questions from anybody?
Yeah, the one thing I noticed and I found interesting was the fact that there's no side ladders on the cars.
Nope, didn't have them then. You can look them up, but okay. Once, we're talking 1880s to 1910. Different rules, different safety or lack of safety.
Well, even a lot of the cars, I'm a B&O modeler, and even a lot of the cars in during the Civil War,
yep,
which were 25-foot cars, still had the end and side ladders.
Yep.
That's why I mentioned it. I found it very, very interesting that they weren't there.
Yeah, they just decided they did not want to bother putting them on there. I'm guessing, climb up, jump on the end, and go up the end. You want to get on the roof. I don't know. It's not like you got a lot of choice for XLA cars. You can't run down to the hobby shop and grab a kit from anybody right now.
Well, first off, sure you can. Just find a hobby shop.
Well, there's another, yeah. The nearest one's 85 miles away. I know where it is. Okay. Anybody, any other questions?
No, thank you.
Well, Martin, thanks so very much. That's interesting to see some of the old kits that you put together and what people went through back in those days to build a model railroad. Thanks so very much for doing it.
Nope. Let me get out of this here.
And now I'd like to turn to our featured modeler tonight, Carey Williams. Carey is just an excellent modeler and a fantastic historian collector. So I know that you're going to enjoy meeting him and hearing him and seeing some of his collection. Carey, thanks so much for being here this evening. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Jim. Technically, I'm not really a modeler. I'm more of a collector and historian. So I hope I don't disappoint you, but we're going to kind of go over the history of O-scale And so we'll kind of do a tour, kind of the collection here. And we'll try to move slowly with the camera, so not that you won't need to have Dramamine, okay? And I was told if I press the camera here, we're gonna go reverse this. Let's hope, uh-oh. Oh, here it is. There we go. Great. Okay, can everyone see a basement?
Yes.
That's
Okay,
perfect.
Okay. We'll try to move slowly over here. O scale or O gauge began in Germany in 1892. It was actually 0 gauge. It was considered a small gauge because they had 1 gauge, 2 gauge, 3 gauge, 4 gauge, and 5 gauge. And 0 gauge was the small, inexpensive gauge. First American O gauge was by Ives in 1901. Wind up. You didn't really have many electric trains until around 1910 when a practical transformer came in, and that was Ives did the first O gauge electric trains in 1910. The people that grew up with these early trains were either by the 20s were adults and had children of their own. And so either they wanted to have a hobby of for themselves or for their children. So they were looking to expand what their childhood memories were and looked again to trains. Now, a lot of people were not satisfied with the template, so they wanted to model their own. There was a small little magazine called Model Maker, which started in 1924, and that was an organ for all model makers. This would be steam people, electric, stationary engines, etc. In 1926, a gentleman by the name of Paul Egoff took out ads for an O gauge electric model train. And here you have the K4, slightly large for 1/4 inch, probably closer to 17/64, but it is O gauge. Your standard O gauge motor that you think of running at a diagonal, but it is a double gear reduction. A little primitive with the tin plate construction, but they're still using center third rail. But he did go to the wide radius of 72 inch, which of course you know of as Lionel adapting in 1934. But Paul Egoff started making this type of engine in 1926. It sold for about $75, which was really quite expensive at the time. The engine has a light under here, and it has a smoke system throughout here. How the smoke works, I don't know. There's only a bit of remains of it. Again, $75 was an incredible amount of money for this piece. He also, with a 72-inch radius, realized he could not do full-length cars. So he made the shorter cars. Sorry. And here's an Egoff car here. It's kind of like a shorty car, all metal construction. So you had kind of a rift between electric trains and then also the live steam. And we'll move slowly up here. Out in the West Coast, you had Roy Ashley, who was doing half-inch scale, which is a 2.5-inch gauge, but then he also came out with 1/4 inch. And here you have one of his 1/4 inch Pacifics in live steam. This is an incredibly expensive piece. This was close to $250 when it came out in 1928. So this was really considered the smallest practical live steam engine. You'd use a white fuel to do your firing. This is as an original engine with the bluing, but most of the modelers tended to go with electric for the 1/4 inch, and then also half-inch scale and above were the live steam boys. The first cast car in O gauge came out in 1928, and that's this big cast monster here, which came out of Maine. It's unique because the side they only made one casting, so both sides are identical. shortly thereafter, Ed Alexander saw this and then improved it and came out with his car line, which of course were the improvements with two individual sides unique to themselves. We'll go to the Alexander wall here in a minute. In 1928, also Fred Itkin, who was a model maker, starting with, he was making gliders in the early 20s, but in 1928, he started making trains. Here's one of his, that he partnered in 1929 with Barker. This is an Itkin Barker from 1929, 1930, a double gear reduction. Incredibly great runners, but they were very expensive. Again, around $75 bought this engine. It was a complete piece. And as you can see details rather sparse on it, but there was a very quick learning curve. And the next year or so, here you have another example of an Itkin. Again, much better detailing. This is probably 32, 34. And again, sorry. Here we have another example, probably from 33, 34. Again, Fred Itkin was a custom builder. You kind of told him what you wanted to do, and he would build it, and it would run forever. You spent a lot of money, but it was mechanically perfect. The transformation from the tinplate world into the scale world, you had a lot of early kit makers for cars, but there was a lack of engines. So that was that was kind of the bugaboo in the early O-scale world. Let's go to Scalecraft, and so we'll move slowly over here. Again, I hope not to get anyone sick by moving. Um, 1933, the Chicago World's Fair was a pivotal point for the O-scale world. You had a number of railroads that had exhibits at the World's Fair. You had the Pennsylvania, the IC, New York Central had one, and then C&O. Smith from Scalecraft, or what would become Scalecraft, had the market to do the Pennsylvania line. So he brought out this K4 in 1764, and then also brought out a set of cars for it. The cars have ball bearings in them, so they're incredibly good running and rolling. The engine had a bit of a, at the fair, you're running about 10 hours a day. So unfortunately, it started breaking down, and Fred Itkin had to rebuild the engines to his standard so they could stand up. So here on the top, you have a Scalecraft K4, and below it, you have an Itkin K4, custom built 1764 scale. You have, these are both outside third rail, so you have the outside third rail sweep, and then you have your mechanical reverser over here, running universal motors. You can run AC or DC, and then you just manually reverse here. 1764, of course, is the correct scale. Quarter inch is not. So these are, physically, these are very, we'll show a couple examples shortly, but this wall here is all 1764s. Chicago, there were a couple advocates for 1764s. There was a company called ATA who built this Chicago Northwestern Class H. Okay, we're gonna go underneath, sorry. 1934 at the World's Fair, Lee B. Green, who had was in the automobile industry, designed a line jumping off of Roy Ashley's Acme line of, again, 1764s using sand casting. So here we have the New York Central Hudson in 1934, all sand cast with brass detail, pulling a line of their passenger cars, again, all sand cast aluminum. Levy Green came out with 1764 because he called it true scale, trying to get people to go that direction as opposed to the 1/4 inch, where Alexander was a strong advocate for 1/4 inch. Levy Green also brought out the K4 in which is above it here in sandcast, and a full set of three freight cars, your boxcar, tank, and hopper. So these all came out in were commercially available in 35 and 36, large acceptance at the World's Fair in 1934. Levy Green he realized the sandcasts had limitations regarding detail. You don't get rivets. You can only do so much with sand casting. So he raised some money to do die casting. Unfortunately, he didn't raise enough money and he couldn't pay the bill. So here's the die cast engine, which is a mini scale. The work was done by Congress Tool and Die in Detroit. They did a beautiful job on their castings, kind of akin to, say, a Lionel 700E. This came out in early 1937. It predated the Lionel 700E. And additionally, they came out with a combine car and the Pullman, all in die cast, and then a set of freight cars, again, the 3 cars, the box, the hopper, and a tank. Easy construction, 2-piece construction, 2 sides that you put together. The die-cast cars are quite heavy. So the passenger cars are about a little over 5 pounds a piece. Later we'll run these and show you. The M1 up here, that was Levy Green's 3rd engine, which he was going to come out with, but he kind of lost the company and was never able to produce it. So then Leonard Blum from Cleveland released it for the first time in 1948 as a sandcast aluminum engine. We ask ourselves, why were there so many Hudsons and K4s? In anything, when you start going to production, you want to be able to sell a lot of these things. You go to all the work to make these things, you want to be able to sell them. And initially, everyone wanted the K4. You could run on a fairly small, tight radius. At this time, 48-inch radius was considered the norm, so a K4 would do a good job on that. Again, you're now doing the outside 3rd rail with your sweep, and we'll come down here and show what outside 3rd rail is. Here's outside 3rd rail. So you have your 2 conventional rails, and then you have your basically like an HO rail with a chair rail, which the little chair where your rail sits on top of. And that's where you pick up your hot line. We'll continue over here. Now, Alexander was a big advocate for 1/4 inch. And in 1933, he had the commission to do the entire C&O layout at the World's Fair. And so he brought out a number of C&O engines, including this Mikado, which then he brought out as a kit. It was his first kit that he offered, starting in 1934. And he also issued the improvement of the original die-cast cast aluminum cars with his cast aluminum cars, which were quite heavy, but they do have a little bit more detail. These are cast aluminum roofs and sides. So let's get back out of the center here. Sorry. We'll go over to Alexander. Alexander was basically commission based. So he would get commissions from various railroads to build models. And so in 1933, he had the C&O layout that he built the entire thing. And then in 1939, he had a Pennsylvania contract to produce the S1. Here is the he made 3 of these models. This is the one from the World's Fair in New York. There was another one that went to the San Francisco Treasure Island exhibit. These are some of the Alexander cars a little bit later with aluminum sides and wood roofs. And in 1938, he came out with these smooth cars. Again, he had the commission from the Pennsylvania Railroad to produce a streamline set. So you have these cars that he introduced, and they were pulled by his GG1, which was cast bronze. Sorry, the GG1's over here. There's the Alexander GG1. Again, probably 1938, 1939, outside third rail with the sweeps and then the mechanical reverse there. While we're down here, we'll go into Walthers. So the end of the World's Fair in Chicago, they had the City of Portland in 1934, and it was a big, big success. The world of streamlining. Lionel raced to bring out their example, which is fairly common. That's the bottom exhibit here. That's in 17/64 scale, but they truncated it because they're only doing 72-inch radius. And the top one here is Walther's 1/4 inch. So here you can plainly see the 1/4 inch smaller scale on the top that Walthers brought out, and the larger castings of the 17/64 Lionel, which is the true scale for O gauge, at the bottom.
Carey,
Yep.
Carey,
Yes.
let me ask you a question.
Yes.
What would those trains sell for back in that time?
Well, here, okay, that's the real reason why you see thousands of the Lionel one. The Lionel one was ready to run with a loop of track, was $20. The Walthers one, these both came out basically within 2 weeks of each other. The Walthers one ready to run was $65.
Got it.
So 3 times the cost. This is the only one. This is the only Walthers I've seen. And of course, we've all seen thousands and thousands of the Lionel one. But Walthers, even though he didn't have great sales with that one, was not deterred. He wanted to continue making trains. So he advertised a Baltic in a 1/4 inch, but I've never seen an example of it. Here we have his 1937 Mikado, and Walthers tended to buy out other companies to make the things. So this is an Acme, Roy Ashley's Acme company, using some of his castings and then sheet brass above. So that's in 1937. This particular one was built in 1938, but that's their first steam engine that they brought out on their own. 1940, under the direction of Red Ball, a double O guy here in Chicago, he designed a modular system for Walthers. And that's what these engines are here. So what they wanted to do is use common components. If you think of, say, like the All-Nation line or the Babbitt line, where they use the same type valve gear, they use it on the Northern, they use it on the little switcher, they use it on their Mikado, and they have individual gearboxes for each axle. So it's called poly drive. So you drive from the motor to each axle to these gearboxes. And then they're doing 2-rail now. 1939 was the big switch from outside third rail to 2-rail. So the insulation became an issue. So they started doing this tenonite plastic hubs, which early plastic was not a good situation. They tended to break up, and then the threading for the side rods would strip out. Not a very good picture. But Walthers brought out a whole line of parts, everything from an 060 to this big mammoth Northern they brought out. Walthers got the commission to do one of the layouts in the 1939 World's Fair. And he brought these out there, and of course, they didn't perform too terribly well. So we don't know who rebuilt the engines. It may have been Fred Icken or somebody else. But 1940, Walthers did offer these in their catalog, 40 and 41. They did sell a number of them, but they were not very successful just because you have an aluminum punched frame here, which flexes. It's filled with a bunch of holes. You have a big KDA number 3 in here. It's only supported in from the front, so it flexes. You have these big plastic center drivers here, which strip out. So there were many flaws. Fortunately, World War II comes in, and so he's saved from selling these things. 1945, in his catalog, he comes up with a full page of why there's problems with these and all the corrections they're going to do. And in 1946, he comes up with, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to do something else. So the whole idea of the poly drive kind of dies. However, Walthers was very much an advocate for the support of model railroading. And during World War II, when all the other lines were basically closed down because they could not sell anything, he did come up with scraping together parts to sell this. This is Walthers' War Baby. The War Baby is basically a wood body, wood here with just a little brass on the outside. Sometimes each model would be different. Any kind of motor he would find, he would stick in with it. And that was his diesel idea for during the war. Pre-war, he came up with the little box diesel here. That started in 1938. Okay. Let's go to Bill Lenore. Well, while we're here, let's do Scalecraft, some more Scalecraft. Okay, we saw the Scalecraft K4 over there. Here's another K4. Scalecraft was in trouble. It was a local gentleman here in Chicago by the name of Smith. He was having a hard time putting funds together because, again, your market here is very small. You go all the work to make these models, and then you sell a handful of them. So Elliott Donnelly, big publishing house magnate here in Chicago, came to the rescue of Scalecraft, buying it and dumping a lot of money in it. And the easiest way to make a small fortune in model railroading, of course, is to start with a large fortune. And that's exactly what Elliott Donnelly did. So 1935, he comes up here with the Hudson, because again, you bring that out because everyone wants to buy one. Cast bronze boiler. This is 1/4 inch. This is 1764. So you can kind of see how much bigger it is. And they did start doing a lot of changes. The early engines tend to drive from the back axle, which means all this has to be in a line really nicely. If it's not aligned nicely, you're not going round and round. So the middle, then they started changing driving from the center here, and then it's not so critical your side rods by driving from the center. So all the Scalecraft engines, the early ones have drive in the back, later ones have drive in the center. So Elliott Donnelly races to Scalecraft to save them, bringing out the Hudson in 35, and then bringing out their Mountain and Pacific. The Mountain came out late in 1936. But Elliott really wanted the name, Scalecraft. He wanted a known name for his 00 line, which he introduced in 1937, the year before Lionel came up with their 00 line. Post-war, Elliott Donnelly was more involved with the printing industry, and the whole thing kind of fell apart. Even though Scalecraft was a huge name pre-war, post-war, it just fell apart. They just couldn't get their act together to do anything. But in 1950, they scraped together, they were going to build this mountain here, or this Northern, I apologize, this is Northern. Unfortunately, the Korean War came in, so there was a lot of shortages of brass and bronze, and they just never came to production. So ultimately, all the Scalecraft pieces were basically given to Bob Smith of Central Locomotive Works, and he brought this out to his line there. And that's one that says Central. That's from Bob Smith. While we're here, we're talking more about Bob Smith. This is Bob Smith's first engine that he came out with. That's the New York Central Mikado. He brought that out in 1947 using Adams and Son castings. Okay, let's go over here, do a little Bill Lenore. Okay, Bill Lenore is a very, very important person in the O-scale world. He's here from Chicago, and his love was doing the Chicago Great Western line. So he starts building engines in 1934. He was primarily a quarter-inch guy. And so he comes up with this Chicago Great Western little 10-wheeler. And here are some of his cars that he originally built from 1934 and 1935, all hand lettered. There we go. And then he ultimately went on to model for scale railway models, which we'll go to in a second. And then in 1940, he brings out his Saginaw line. So the Saginaw line starts with the, where are we? The Consolidated up here. And then he brings out the E6 and then the 10-wheeler. So again, doing Pennsylvania because everyone wanted a Pennsylvania train. If you brought out a Pennsylvania train, you sold trains. If you brought out the Chicago Great Western, you sold 4 engines. You had to do with the economy that things were actually going to sell. So these were kits that came out about between 40 and 42. They sold for about $40. When he was drafted, the whole thing kind of collapsed. So even though they were going to reintroduce them, Pioneer got the molds, they did nothing with them. And then post-war, Bob Smith ended up with them. In 1958, he reintroduced the Consolidation up here. But Bill Lenore went on to help Bill Walters upgrade his train line of cars. And Bill Lenore went to go partner with Jack Ferris in Huntington, Indiana, with scale railway models. And they did an incredible job of building a lot of beautiful, beautiful engines. Here's K5 Erie. They did a lot of Erie and Wabash because Jack Ferris was involved with, his father was an engineer on the Wabash, and one of his employees was with the Erie. And their trademark was this working valve gear. So the valve gear for $5 is attached to a mechanical reverser in there. So you throw your valve gear here for actually reversing the engine. We'll come over here and I'll show you a few more of their engines. They were custom built. So here's another 10-wheeler. Here's 2 of the Indiana Harbor Belt switchers. You have a big New York Central Mountain down there, another Erie Pacific, and then a B&O Atlantic. Again, these were custom built, costing about $100 to $200, depending on how much detail you wanted on it. Again, you have the working valve gear, and the 080 has a working valve up here, which is pretty impressive to see when it runs. Now, again, it's how many things you can sell, because the problem with O-scale on at this rate was these were custom built engines. And the problem with custom built engines is there's only so many people at the top of the pyramid that can afford these type of prices. And again, these weren't train collectors, they were operators. So once you have half a dozen engines, you don't really need anymore. So even though you're buying them for $100 to $200 a piece, there's a limit of the number you're going to have on your layout. Okay, let's see, where should we go next? Okay, Okay, we'll go one more Lionel thing. We'll go back up here. Now, Joshua Lionel desperately wanted to be accepted by the train world. So he brought out the city of Portland, and he donated one to the New York Society of Model Engineering. They immediately outside third railed the item and then ran it on their layout. And Josh was a very happy boy being accepted. So the next year he comes out with the Hiawatha, again, scale to 17/64. The scale world loves it. They buy the engine. Of course, they'd never buy the cars from Lionel, but then Walthers jumps on the bandwagon and brings out the Walthers cars for it. So here you have a Lionel engine pulling the Walthers cars. Of course, the final engine that Josh was able to bring out, the Lionel Corporation was selling tinplate trains, toy trains, and they could sell thousands and thousands and thousands of them, dwarfing any sort of numbers that O-Scale would ever have. So Josh, again, wanted to be accepted by these wealthy society folks that were going to the New York Society of Model Engineering. And so his piece to the resistance, of course, was the 700E, the New York Central Hudson. Even though other people had brought it out, everyone told him, "I'll come out with a Hudson, you'll sell a zillion of them." Well, he scraped together enough money, and by the end of 1937, actually the second week in December of 1937, he brings out his 700E, selling for $75, which for O-Scale world, that was dirt cheap. For the tinplate world, that's a whole lot of money. So he introduces a cheaper model at half price at $37, the 763, same body, and it sells like hotcakes to a lot of people who then modify them. These two engines here are Foster engines. Foster was down in St. Louis. He bought about 25, 30 of the 763s and then had them modified, modifying the Hudsons and the Pacifics. He did an articulated, and here you did a streamlined engine. And his railroad was called the Atlantic Pacific. There were a number of articles covering his train. Now, you may not have a very high opinion of Lionel, but this modified 763 will pull all 11 of these Walthers cars. And if you know anything about Walthers cars with Walthers trucks, they're like dragging a brick around the track. But this engine will actually pull it, which I was more than impressed. Minton Cronkite, who you know from Q Gauge, kind of the early version of P48, was one of the early advocates of O-Scale. Starting in 1929, he had an exhibit at his Connecticut home and he was probably one of the that introduced the outside third rail. They're trying to separate themselves from center third rail. And he formed a company called Crovan. He was a very successful businessman in Connecticut, sold his electrical company, but took his R&D gentleman, Otto, from Germany with him. And Otto ended up designing the Crovan line. So here's a Crovan K4 with some Crovan cars. Now the Crovan cars, again, Alexander made cast aluminum cars, very heavy. These are sheet aluminum. They're very, very, very light construction, operating vestibules here. Very impressive, and more impressive, these actually survive with this very light construction. But these are incredibly expensive cars. These are probably in the $25 a piece, $30 a piece range in the early 30s, which again, the depression was going on. Let's go back up here. Yeah, we'll show you an Alexander car. This is an Alexander car. If you go to Model Craftsman, which started in 1934, Alexander does an article about this car, how to build it, or of course you can buy it from him. This was $34 in 1934, just incredibly expensive, all hand lettered, all built. But again, this was primarily your rich were buying these cars. Everybody else was just buying the kits and then modifying tinplate engines to be able to pull their trains around. Like Lionel, when they introduced their the Hudson, it took them 2.5 years to bring out any decent cars to be able to be pulled by this. The cast freight cars didn't come out until 1940, and they never did produce a passenger car worth a darn to pull behind these engines. Okay. Pre-war, in the diesel world, you have Pomona. Now, Pomona did these beautiful slant nose engines, 1764s. And they also did these beautiful cars, again, 1764s, so quite large, from 1940 to 41. Cast bronze nose and top, and then sheet brass. Post-war, basically the same engine was offered by Adams and Son, where he brings out, again, selling castings for the nose and the roof, and sometimes belly parts. And then you're on your own to build everything else, or you get Siebers, sides, and drives. There are a number of people that did offer bits and pieces, but again, not so much in the way of ready-to-run engines. You had to scratch-built everything. This engine here is built by Bernard Corbin, so this is quite a step up from your average Adams engine that you find. Some of the other early post-war engines, you had Baldwin brought out E-units here. These are kind of crude sand casts, very heavy, 1/4-inch scale. Baldwin partnered with Walthers in 1947. They brought out an F unit and then these E units. And the divorce kind of happened around 1951, 52, and Baldwin continued on their own, going from the E7 and then later introducing their E8s. Very heavy bronze castings. We'll go up here. 1949, Ken Craft came out with these beautiful FAs, cast in bronze, complete with rivets, very, very nicely done. Okay, here we have, everyone's seen the General Motors switcher engine. It started with Bob Smith, and he went to Adams and Son to have it cast in brass or bronze. Matthews, who kind of at that time was running General Motors trains, General Motors Corporation, kind of stole the idea and then had it produced in a die cast. But here's an original bronze one from 1948. These are Wentz. Wentz was out in, I believe it's Laredo, California, near San Francisco, an attorney, and he produced these FT units from 1948 till about 1951. Okay, let's go over here. This is an Exacta train, the Southern Pacific one, cast bronze shells, and then molded copper cars. We'll cover that here a bit more. Here's a scratch-built GG1, late 30s. Let's go over here. Okay, Minton Cronkite was famous for building the big layouts in the 30s. So he had his big layout in Connecticut, and then when he moved to California in 1931, he built a large layout there, and then he built commercial layouts for the Texas and Pacific and for the Santa Fe. And then 1939, he had a big exhibit for the Santa Fe up in at Treasure Island. So he had these cars built by Crovan, some of the last cars they made. He had 3 sets of these made. So he ran them in his layout in end of 1937 and 38, and then they go to Treasure Island, and then 1941, this set went to the Museum of Science Industry, his masterpiece Q gauge railroad. Post-war, Santa Fe, who had the railroad, wanted to modernize it. So they hired the local Bob Smith to design the PA. So he comes up with this PA here, cast aluminum and cast bronze, but it's 17/64, and it matches with the Exacta cars, which are these cars. These are the 4 of the cars that came from the, again, the Museum of Science and Industry. And you can easily see the difference between 17/64 and 1/4-inch scale. Let's see, where else should we go here? Okay, we'll go up here. There were a number of scratch builders. 1948, Gil Stovacek out of the Cleveland area built this monster 210-2 for his American Central. The one below it is Joe DiGorzio, Pennsylvania 10-wheeler. The top one here is a Paul Egoff, a late Paul Egoff from 1938. This brass engine here, that's an Ed Alexander. That's one of the exceptions. That's 17/64. So in 1938, he had a contract from the New York Central to design engines to be able to put in the dining cars of the various 20th century trains. So he made 20 sets of castings of this engine, but only sold 8 engines. So that kind of shows you the small scale of consumerism for the O scale product. I mean, they were expensive engines, and they're at this price level, you just could not sell them. You may know Jerry White by name. Both Jerry White and Earl Ellison were out in Maine. Or is it New Hampshire. And they brought out this engine. Either you could have it as a 10-wheeler or a consolidated. And then 1939, they both moved to work with Lowball. And then it turns into was sold by Judd. But this is the first Jerry White, Earl Ellison combined effort train that they came out with. We'll go back here. We mentioned Lowball. Here are the Lowball line. Now, Lowball had a successful screw company, machining company in San Francisco, and the trains were kind of a sideline. So he starts building train parts as early as 34, making kits, and then introducing his little, this one up here, I apologize, his 060 in 1937. And you can see it's rather large compared to the Pacific up there. This is a 17/64 scale again. And then later he converted to a 1/4 inch. So you have the big one there is the pre-war one. And then his post-war 060 is this little diminutive 060 over here. This is his Union Pacific 484. 1939, he introduces the Chicago Northwestern Berkshire. In 1953, in the Lowball catalog, he claims that this is the most successful engine they made, and they've sold nearly 2,000 of them. So let's do a little math problem here. This was introduced in 1939, and 1953, they've nearly sold 2,000 of them. Okay, 1940, John Taylor of Mantua introduces a small little 040 engine, the Yardbird. In 9 months, they sell 10,000 of them. So here you have an engine, took them 14 years to be able to rack up nearly 2,000 in sale. And here you have John Taylor and HO producing 10,000 in a 9-month period. So the quantity and the numbers of the early manufacturers, you just could not compete with the smaller gauges. And you had Gordon Varney and you had John Taylor, big, strong, businessmen. They were all about the bottom line. Where in the O scale world, you had Elliot Donnelly and you had Roland Lobau, who were rich people, and this is kind of a sideline. So it was a hobby for them, as opposed to really worrying about the bottom dollar. Where the HO market was driven strictly by market. So it really had a much more successful catering to developing the market for mass consumption. Trolleys were an easy and cheaper way for a lot of people to get into the hobby. Druck came out with this cast, a little red devil in the end of 1935. And then they, in bronze, he came out with a couple of other models. Here's the Liberty Line one from the Brill. Graham from Brooklyn started bringing out some bronze models here. There's some of the Graham cars. Walthers introduced their cars starting in 37, I believe, or 37, 38, which were very successful, and they were selling those for nearly 30 years. John Grzuina came out with his cars in cast aluminum, pre-war and then post-war, refining the clear stories in 48 and 49 in 1764s. Another popular piece was the Walthers Doodle Bug. So we have a couple Doodle Bugs down here. Okay. So why don't we run a few trains? Here. 1939 at the World's Fair. This is one of the engines they ran, the switcher, and then they designed their own freight cars. It was called the ERR, Eastern Railroads. They wanted generic cars, generic engines. It was a combined force of 14 different railroads. And these are cast aluminum cars. You have roller bearings on all the wheels, again, so they would be running for 8-10 hours a day. Here's the William Crooks, which the plans for this came out in Model Craftsman in 1938. And then a gentleman scratch built this one, and the Williams Crook went to the 1939 World's Fair. So the railroads, your two magazines, Craftsman and Model Railroader, were very influential to the hobby, because as soon as they would come up with plans for it, you magically had models being produced. Such an example is here. Model Craftsman, their first year, does plans for the Blue Comet, the Jersey Central Blue Comet, and at the end of 1934. And then you start seeing examples. Here's a scratch-built one from the mid-30s. Here's a Bernard Corbin engine below that, probably dating to the mid-50s. So, okay. Now, you've been very patient. We'll run some trains. We'll go over here. I have two layouts. This center layout is 2-rail. This is a multiplex layout. Multiplex is by Crispin Valve in Pennsylvania. They're still in business. The two brothers that ran the company were railroaders. And they figured that one of the bugaboos for the O-scale world was track, because trying to get someone away from tin plate is you really did not have a ready source for putting together fast track. So Multiplex came up with the idea that we will design a railroad for you or sell you modular track. And you can see there's a division right there. So they would design a railroad, a whole layout for you, and then lay it all out. Of course, that meant this was incredibly expensive to do. But nonetheless, they just assume if I'm rich, everyone else is rich too. But that was, of course, not the case. But they did get the contract to build all the track for the 1939 World's Fair. This layout was kind of a salesman's sample for them. It was an automatic railroad. It's basically a folded figure 8. And then you have in your siding here that you can store 2 trains in. So you can come inside, park a train in there, and then the next one would come back out, do the loop around, and then go back in on the passing siding, and then the other one would come out. Yours truly has not figured that all out yet, but we do get it to run. This was introduced, this layout's from 1939, and then it went into private hands in 1941. A gentleman in Pittsburgh had it. Okay. The other layout we have here is outside third rail. So a poor man's outside third rail is you just use a nail or a screw and solder on a double O or a HO type rail. You have steam engines with outside sweeps. Here are more of the correct chair rails, and your rail dips down and then picks back up. So you have the 2 contacts on your engine, and you have a contact on your tender as a sweep, as a pickup, and then on your engine. This is the mini scale from 1937 Hudson, which was designed by Levy Green, but produced by Congress Tool and Die in Detroit, pulling 4 of their passenger cars. So this is probably about a 22-pound train. And this is all 1764s. So let's see. There we go. This is from 1937. Up here on the wall, until the train comes back, we have some Joe Fisher cars. Joe Fisher was a custom builder of passenger cars post-war. The upper set is an early set from the late 40s. He offered them initially for around $35 with no interiors or lights. And then to cut out the bottom feeders and the riffraff, he upped his price to about $75 and then included interiors and lights. So the bottom set is a later set. Okay, here comes our Hudson again. And you can see the sweeps. There we go. Okay. So again, that's a mini scale Hudson and cars. Now we'll go to the 2-rail. And here we have a lowball Challenger. It's a pre-war engine from 1940 to 41, pulling lowball cars. kind of tight radius. It's not real thrilled with the 48-inch radius, but it tolerates it. Some of the buildings on the layout, these are model structures. There's a company out in Santa Cruz, California. And these, you'll find these on some of the finest club layouts. They're very, very expensive at the time. That's another model structures. Downtown. Some of their outbuildings, the polling tower. There's one of their stations. There's a 2-engine shed over there. Okay, we'll put this guy away in a minute. Bring him back up here. Okay, now we will go to the other buildings. Let's see here. Let's hope this works. Oops. We have to use the big hook. There we go. Okay, here we are. We just pulled into Raymondale. This is Frank Ellison's Raymondale. We just took a very short ride with the Bumblebee. Frank Ellison started in the 30s with doing template articles in standard gauge for Model Builder, and then graduated to O-scale in 1939 when he started building the Delta lines in New Orleans. So here are some of the original buildings from Delta lines. Frank had 2 locations for Delta lines. Raymondale here is actually from the second location, which started in 1942. And he was very much for doing things with timetables and switching and being very accurate with things. And he wrote some incredible articles that convinced everybody that they too could build things like this. Now, this is all hand done. Hand painted bricks, hand painted lettering. Back here on chick sails, again, hand painted wood siding here. He was a very, very talented builder and certainly a very strong advocate for the O-scale world. I was very fortunate to be able to acquire a good share of the remaining part of Delta lines. There's the coal yard. And here's Swanky Coffee. These are some of the backdrops from a couple of the other towns in Delta lines. And here's the Raymond Barrel Company from a town of Gina. There's the freight shed from Chappelle. Okay, so now the Delta lines started in its last location in 1942 and remained there until 1956 when it was disassembled and put into storage. Dr. Sachs then bought it and moved it to Boston. Unfortunately, during the trip up there, a lot of it was, no, that's wrong. Come on, I won't you run. There you go. Okay, we'll take a ride. Stop. Okay, this is Donaldson. Donaldson's one from the first layout. So you have the oblong box company back here. That's an original piece. This is a barrel company. This is some of the backdrops from Gina and some additional backdrops from the Delta lines. Up front here, we have the hamburger building. The spot cash is not original. That's a copy. Frank Ellison also incorporated the Scalecraft buildings in Donaldson. So here's the Scalecraft station and the little guard shack. So I'm in the process of building this. I'm not an accurate one for switching and doing timetables. I'm just trying to recreate this, the town, and I'll just basically be a run through. So that's kind of a wrap up. We'll go back over here. My collection primarily is before 1955. I stopped there because 1955, you start with Max Gray and an individual creativity of the models kind of ceases, and you go more towards the import lines. One of the exceptions to my 1955 rule is this Grand Central Station that was made by Trainworks for Lionel, and then one of the train sheds here. We should cover GMC. So we'll come down here. And 1946, Gordon Varney comes out with a 10-wheeler. So what Walthers had tried to do using various components to make various engines and failed at, Gordon Varney did an excellent job with in the HO world. So he comes up with a 10-wheeler. At the end of 1946, he was able to sell roughly about 1,000 of the 10-wheelers. That's why they're so popular today. But then he looked around and said, why isn't anyone ordering anymore? Well, 1,000 of any engine in the O-scale world is just a total saturation. And of course, he was accustomed to the HO market where 1,000 would be a month's sales. So he dumps the entire O-scale line to Matthews, which would be GMC, General Model Trains. So General Model Trains is the flag holder for a while for the O-scale world. He takes over the Varney line. The Varney engine was $100. Immediately for Matthews to get the money back, he almost slashes the price in half at $50. So he pisses off all the dealers. He pisses off everyone that bought the thing at $100. And he's, of course, just trying to grab some money. He uses the components very cleverly on various other engines. Here's one of the Mountains that he came out with in 1949. He also takes over Labosi's beautiful die-cast F units, who ran into trouble. He was from Milwaukee. Again, die-cast is very expensive, and so we probably had close to $20,000 or more invested in the castings for these engines. And Matthews comes over to rescue them, and they produce them. But again, once you have the castings, it's hard to change things, or if you do, it's a very expensive proposition. So GMC, General Model Trains, is off to a running start. They're doing all sorts of things. They're bringing out these beautiful diesels here. They have the Switcher. They bring out an Atlantic. They bring out a Pacific. They bring out this Mountain. But again, sales aren't keeping up with expectations and not paying the bills. So at the end of 1949, Matthews decides to pull all his product from dealers. So only go sell directly to the customer. Well, the problem with that is your average consumer goes to the local hobby shop, where the whole hobby shop then shows him what's available and tries to talk him into something. If you go to the hobby shop and you don't see any O-scale there, you're not going to buy it. He's going to buy a Varney, he's going to buy a Mantua, he's going to buy something else. And all of a sudden, you have an incredible lack of O-scale on the market because Matthews goes direct. And by the end, he brings out his own magazine to try to promote the line. 1950, he brings out this huge articulated engine. The castings were done by Adams. Adams is a common thread through a lot of the manufacturers. So everyone has everything made by Adams. But they bring out, it's either 50 or 100 of these casting sets. 50 or 100, not 1,000, not 2,000, not 10,000, 50 or 100. And they don't sell out, which means you're holding a lot of stock and a lot of money is sitting on the table. Matthews declares bankruptcy by November of 1950, collapsing GMC. A huge blow to the O-scale market. The following year, towards the end of the year, All Nation, the hobby shop, steps up to purchase the stock of GMC. For a few bucks more, the judge just throws in all the tooling and everything else because they were the only real bidder for the line. So fortunately, they were able to carry the torch and promote the line, and were able to produce product for the next 20 years plus for the O-scale world. But unfortunately, Matthews kind of created this house of cards, which kind of collapsed in on itself. So let's see, down here we have two Heinz engines. Again, the models were made initially designed by Bill Lenore. There's the Mikado from 47 and the 080 from 1948. There's another Baldwin. Jack Bramble was an early modeler in 1764. These are some of his last engines, the Sharks, probably from 1951, 52. So I'll kind of conclude. If there's questions, or if you saw something that you want me to go back to or explain, I'm happy to. Again, you've been very patient. I don't know if you're still out there or not. But again, thank you very much. I hope I didn't chase you all the way.
Carey, as far as I know, you haven't lost anybody. Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
What was the fight between 1764 and quarter-inch scale? What was that all about?
Well, it goes back to Haverly was the first NMRA president. And he was here in Chicago, and he had a traveling layout. I have a number of his cars and engines. And of course, 1764 is the true scale. When you see, oh Christ, oh damn. When you see the overhang on a piece of 1764 as opposed to a piece of quarter-inch scale, once you see it, you can never unsee it. The scale, the overhang, the way it hugs the rails, the full length. Again, once you actually see it, quarter-inch just looks too small, which it is. So when NRA came out with their standards, and I believe it's still to today, you can look at the NRA standards. It says you can have quarter-inch or 17/64. Unfortunately, the manufacturers all were arguing amongst each other. Alexander was the biggest advocate for quarter-inch, where Lee B. Green was the biggest advocate for 17/64. Yeah, okay. Here, let me get you a head-on shot of the my loco, or the mini scale. And they continue this argument through the 30s, early 40s. Minton Cronkite comes up with, an inch and a quarter is all wrong, which it is for quarter-inch. So he comes out with Q gauge, not Q scale, Q gauge. And Q gauge is actually 1 3/16, so close to your P48. So, okay, here. Can you give me back the camera. Here's the front of the 1764's Hudson, and the way you see it sit on the rails is proper compared to a prototype. Where if I put a 1/4 inch anything, you're going to see it looks wrong. Which again, 1/4 inch, if you blow it up to the right. If you bring it to the right, if you put it on P48, that's why P48 people survive, because it looks different when you until you see it and you actually see what the difference, you're not going to know the difference. I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. I'm just pointing out that there's a difference between the two. And again, NMRA has the two standards. So it's the two standards are either 1/4 inch or 1764. 1764 is indeed the correct scale. You can kind of see the overhang here. There are a number of things that are made in 1764s throughout the year. Again, Lionel started with 1764s for their city of Portland and Hiawatha, and then went to 1/4 inch for the 700E. And then of course they never used scale after that. But and on the pre-war diesels, our Pomona, those are 1764s. The Adams castings are 1764s, but then the bald ones are 1/4 inch. So until you see them right next to each other, you really won't know it. But when you do see it, it stands out like a sore thumb.
If I'm understanding this correctly, it's sort of like the difference between HO and OO.
Well, yes and no. HO in America is 3.5 millimeter, and OO in America is 4 millimeter. So in England, you have 4 millimeter running on HO track.
Oh, so 1764 cannot run on O gauge.
No, it's designed to run on O gauge. It's the proper scale. It's a bigger body. So here, let's see. Can I grab these two up here?
So the gauge is the same.
Yeah,
Between them, the scale
Right.
changes. So that's like HO track being used for ON30. The scale is different. The gauge is the same.
Right. Let me. Okay.
Yeah, I
Here-
believe OO and HO is the same thing, where they both run on the same track. It's just that OO is if I remember correctly, is 176, whereas HO is 187. If I remember correctly.
for England. For OO in America is an entirely different gauge. So yeah, here you have HO on the center on this is HO track here, and this is OO here. Two entirely different gauges. But here you have 1764 and 1/4 inch. These are the two lowball 060s. So here you have the pre-war 1764 and then the post-war 1/4 inch. And you can see they're dramatically different in this particular case. But when you put them next to each other, this is the proper overhang for the track. Here's another. Okay, I'm cheating here. I'm using a 1764 caboose. See how big that damn caboose is compared to the boxcar? That's a 1/4 inch caboose, or a 1/4 inch boxcar 1764 caboose.
So O scale, if I remember correctly, is actually 5-foot gauge, where you're saying the 1764, it would be 4 foot 8.5.
Right. Yep. That's correct.
But it's the same actual physical gauge.
It's the same physical gauge being modeled. Yes.
Gotcha.
So that's why the P48 people got all excited and did their thing, which is a different gauge. I'm sure someone out there is a P48 and they can speak for themselves regarding that.
I think there's someone here that does P48.
Yeah, I've got some of it.
But yeah, that's a different game.
So, Carey, let me ask you, the P48 is more 1/4 inch or more 17?
P48 is the proper gauge for 1/4 inch scale.
Got it.
4 foot 8.5.
Yes.
So you know
Yeah.
what's interesting, going back to those two switchers you showed us,
Yes.
if you do the math on it, the difference is actually only 6%. And it sure looks to me like if I look at the height of those, there's a much more dramatic than 6% difference in the height. Right? So if you take 17/64 to 16/64, that's 1/64 difference. If you take 1 divided by 17 or 16, it's about 6%. So there should be about 6% difference. When I look at the engine on the right, it looks to me like it's discernibly higher than 6%. So it's kind of,
It's big, yes.
yeah, it's interesting that it's kind of both the size generally, but also they picked a larger prototype or something, so, or made it bigger.
Well, again, if you, let's see, these cars here, again, those are, the top
Yep.
one are 1/4 inch. That's pure 1/4 inch. And the bottom ones are 17/64. The Exacta cars were offered both in 1/4 inch or in 17/64. So these happen to be the big ones because they're running with the PAs, which are 17/64.
And that looks like about 6% there, when you look at those two. But anyway, just an interesting perspective.
Right, we'll go over here. Here's another example of an Exacta car. Here's the, this is a 1/4 inch. That's 17/64. So you can see it's definitely a taller body. Those are the tall ones. And then these two here are the short ones. And they look very little behind the Alexander or the Adams casting for the 17/64 diesel. These are molded copper from about 1948. Let's see what, any other questions?
Yes, I have another one. There was earlier in the beginning of your talk, you were talking about how they used to have zero being the smallest number. I'm assuming number 1 is still being used today.
Number 1 is G gauge or garden gauge.
Yes. So what was 2, 3, and 4 and 5? You know, what sizes were they?
They just get bigger and bigger and bigger. 2 was 2 in America was actually 2-inch gauge, but in Europe it was closer to like 2.5. And then or it was right around 2, and then 3 was like a 2.5 inch, and then 4 was somewhere around 3.5, and I think 5 was 4 inch. It did not go up in actual numbers to match inches because it was European. But here in America, you had O gauge, and then the big gauge here was 2-inch. Started with Carlisle and Finch in 1896, doing 2-rail DC, and then Lionel comes along with standard gauge in 1907 with 2 1/8 inch to confuse things. And that was the gauge that kind of took over and smushed out the 2-inch gauge here in America and continued on until the mid-30s when O gauge took the reign until 1940. And by 1940, HO took the reign over O gauge in the model world.
Thank you.
Sure.
Well, originally 0 gauge was 7 millimeter, right? And that's how a half O became HO, or 3.5.
3.5, correct. Yep.
Right. So
Yep.
Didn't 7 millimeters actually convert to 17/64?
I've never done the math to that. I'll let someone else do the math to that. But I do know your division's correct that the 3.5 is the HO equivalent. But in Europe, they have, in Europe and England, they both have different standards, as does Japan have different standards. So they're when they model O gauge, they're actually larger. So I have I didn't cover the Japanese stuff. International started importing trains in 1948. And they went to Japan and basically found a bunch of modelers. It was an active model train world in Japan pre-war, and post-war was kind of decimated. So they were happy to get any sort of money. And so they started making things. Now, International has a very bad rap for making a lot of crap, real low-end stuff. However, depends who actually made it. So here we have the Challenger that was made by International in 1952. Very nicely done, runs beautifully, costs $200. So when Max Gray went over and started putting his group together, he picked and chose all the best of the modelers that International had. And then hence Max Gray quality forming of a KMT. Here's a set of I don't know if you can see them up there or not. Those are a set of E2s that were made in Japan, probably about 1947, 48. Again, nicely done. International, normally you find they're Atlantic or Pacific, which are pretty low grade, but you're buying a brass engine for like $25 as opposed to like the Challenger, which was $200. So you kind of get what you pay for. But it's the GG1 they produced was much larger scale. It was at least 1764. So it's a monster compared to a quarter-inch one. So again, the different standards for scale exist around the world, whether it be Japan, the continent of Europe, or also England.
Carey, you got a beautiful collection. What's the one piece you don't have that you'd love to have today?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, my love is finding something and then doing the research on it, and trying to authenticate it, that type of thing. So I'm just grateful for everything I find. I just recently got this beautiful Jerry White Allegheny, which is just a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful engine. It runs like a top. Here's another number thing. This engine in 1948 was $475 by Jerry White. I mean, that's serious, serious money. And unfortunately, you just didn't have the market for that. So in 1948, people were buying the GMC kits for $50, or they were closer to around $60, but the Varney 10-wheeler you could get around $50-$60. So I mean, that's why you have so many Varneys out there, and there's only a handful of Jerry White Alleghenies, because the cost was just astronomical to get something like that custom built. One thing I forgot to show, I'm putting together, as you saw, the two science museums. I grew up here in Chicago, so I lived down at the Science Museum, seeing their layout. Here are two buildings from the Museum of Science and Industry layout. Here's the switch tower, which was put in 1953. And here's their freight terminal, which was added in 1964. It was next to their piggyback loader. So again, you've been very patient. I thank you for hanging in there. I'm just learning. I'm more of a tin plater and a collector. So ultimately, I'll try to landscape the layout so it doesn't look like a plywood central. But I've had fun. This is the O scale has been a wonderful world to venture in. It's been very reasonably priced. I've met some wonderful people in it. And it's a wide open field. So I invite anyone that likes to do vintage. This is a wide open field to do research in and to find. There's a lot of wonderful product out there, and a lot of stuff that just has not been unearthed yet. So I invite everybody to jump in and test out the water. It's a fun place to be.
Anybody have any more questions?
Oh,
Carey, Carey, thank you so much for doing this. I just, your collection amazes me. It really does. And I learned a lot tonight from you and can't thank you enough for taking the time to be with us.
Oh, my pleasure. One parting note here on model structures. Okay, we saw the Frank Ellison towns. Frank Ellison kind of handed off the baton to John Allen in the HO world. So John Allen was influenced by O-scale because he did the catalog layout for model structures. So you see this two-stall engine house, which if you go to the John Allen's railroad, you'll see this exact same thing in HO. And also the trestle up here, you'll find trestles like this on John Allen's. Again, he was influenced by O-scale and then reproduced it in HO for his railroad because he did the catalog. He was a photographer, so he helped with a catalog layout for model structures in 1940.
Well, back when you got your collection, Carey, O-scale was, if you were a model railroader, that was what you modeled, right?
One more time.
Back in the 30s, the 40s, even the early 50s, if you were a model railroader, you were an O-scaler, right?
Well, yes and no. O-scale had the market until 1940, and then it lost market share to HO. O-scale was your prime model until 1940, and then HO took it over. For a small instance there, 00 had a little bit of an audience, but again, HO, the people behind HO, Tyler at Mantua and Gordon Varney were incredible businessmen, and they would follow the magazines to the letter. So if the magazine covers this and the people like that, they would come out with it very rapidly. The O-scale market did not do that. You could buy kits very reasonably from Westbrook for $1, $2 from Hawk. They were all very cheap. But to do an engine, it was a lot of money. And the people that produced the engines and the engine kits just could not come up with a variety to compete with HO with the volume that they were able to address. So, lowball was very expensive. Basically it started about $100 and going up to $250, $275 for a ready-built Challenger. Alexander, your engine started at around $100 going north. Fred Icken was $100 north. And your HO is way less than half that price. And they were producing a lot more variety. So they couldn't compete. And the people that were producing the O-scale really never got into the loop of trying to compete competitively with the HO market. Matthews tried, and he failed miserably. He just could not get it. And then the worst thing he could do is pull his product out of the hobby shops. So you no longer had all the local preachers trying to convince you to do O-scale. So everybody went to HO. And then by the 1957, the model scale world was pushed into basically the template world. So you had to produce a package good. You had to produce a snap track, a loop, an engine, a couple of cars, a transformer, and it had to sell for $20. And the O-scale world just was nowhere there to be found. So the numbers are very, very small for the O-scale world.
Gotcha. Well, thanks so much again. I really do appreciate it. And it's just been a fantastic history lesson tonight.
Okay, well, thank you again. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Well, that's it for this evening. Next week, or not next week, but Saturday, our show is going to be with David Rarick, building the card model again. Clark Kooning has a MMR, is doing a segment for us. And our featured modeler is John Wubel, who is bringing back the All Nation Company. So it should be a very interesting evening, and I hope you'll be able to join us. Please visit our website, newtracksmodeling.com for any more information about what is upcoming. And we have some other shows, I think, for about a month now in advance of who's going to be on and so forth. So if you have any questions, you have any comments, you have any ideas for the future, please send me an email or give me a call, either one. And again, thank you so much for being here this evening. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. And best of modeling to you. Thank you again. Good night.